Welcome back to Untold Revenge Files. Today, the story you're about to hear takes place in Ashford Heights, Connecticut. My name is Vanessa Cole. I'm 32 years old, and I'm about to tell you how my own mother tried to steal everything I'd built, using love as her weapon. Some people are raised by parents who cheer for their success. I was raised by a woman who kept score. Growing up, I was never the favorite. That title belonged to my older brother Marcus, who could do no wrong in my mother Lorraine's eyes. She paid for his college. She co-signed on his first apartment. She threw him a graduation party with 100 guests when he got his business degree, even though he dropped out of his first job within 6 months. Me? I put myself through school. I worked 3 jobs during my 20s. I built a real estate development company from nothing but cold calls and stubborn hope. And by 32, I owned a $2.5 million penthouse overlooking the city skyline, purchased with money I earned myself. But to my mother, none of it was mine. "You wouldn't have any of this without me," she used to say. "I raised you. I sacrificed for you. Everything you have exists because I gave you life." For years, I swallowed those words. I nodded. I apologized for being successful in ways that seemed to offend her. I handed her money when she asked. I helped her renovate her kitchen. I paid off her car when Marcus couldn't be bothered. And still, it was never enough. The thing that kept me tied to her wasn't fear. It was love. It was the memory of her holding me when I was 6, telling me I was her little dreamer. It was the photo albums in her attic. It was my grandmother's sapphire ring and my late father's watch, both of which she had kept for safekeeping since I was a teenager. She knew exactly what she held over me. And that's why, when she called me into her lawyer's office that Tuesday afternoon, I went. The conference room smelled like leather and old paper. My mother sat at the head of the table, looking every bit the matriarch she believed herself to be. Beside her was her attorney, a man named Gerald Finch, who barely looked at me when I walked in. "Sit down, Vanessa," my mother said. Not a greeting. A command. I sat. She slid a stack of documents across the table. "These are papers that will restore the family's assets to where they belong." I blinked. "What assets?" "The penthouse, your business accounts, the investments tied to the trust your father left." She folded her hands like a queen issuing a decree. "You've been managing them, but they were never really yours. They came from this family. They belong to this family. Before I tell you exactly what my mother did next, tell me, what time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? I'm really curious to see how far this story will travel." My throat tightened. My father had left me a modest inheritance when he passed. Nowhere near enough to cover the penthouse, which I bought with my own profits. But she had twisted the narrative so cleanly, so confidently, that for a moment I almost believed her. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I built my company. You earned nothing without this family's name behind you." Her tone sharpened. "Sign the papers, Vanessa, or I'll assume you have no interest in your grandmother's ring, your father's watch, or anything else I've been holding for you." There it was. The leverage she had kept in her pocket for 15 years. I looked at the papers. I looked at my mother's face, cold, certain, unashamed. And then I did something I had been preparing for, quietly, for 2.5 years. I signed. My hand shook as I wrote my name. My chest felt like it was collapsing. But I signed every page she put in front of me while Gerald Finch watched with detached professionalism. When I finished, my mother smiled, the kind of smile a predator gives after the trap closes. "Thank you, Vanessa. I knew you'd make the right choice." I left without another word. My legs carried me to the parking garage, and once I was inside my car, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I let myself cry. Not because I had lost, but because of how badly I had wanted her to be different. She wasn't. And I had no idea that what I'd just signed would finally break her and change everything. The night after I signed those papers, I didn't sleep. I sat in my penthouse looking out at the city lights, running through every possible outcome in my head. My mother would call in the morning, triumphant. Marcus would probably smirk at Christmas dinner. Gerald Finch would file the documents, and the world would believe I'd handed over my life's work to a woman who had never respected a single thing I'd built. Except none of that was going to happen. See, 2.5 years earlier, I had sat across from a different attorney. One I'd found myself, one who worked only for me. Her name was Dominique Pratt. She was sharp, skeptical, and had seen more family betrayals than a daytime courtroom show. When I first came to her, I didn't even know what I was protecting myself from. I just knew something was coming. "Your mother has made comments about your assets before?" Dominique had asked during our first meeting. "Comments," I repeated. "Suggestions. She once told my brother that when she passes, she expects him to manage my properties since I'm too emotional to handle money." Dominique had leaned back in her chair and said, "Let's make sure she never has the chance." Over the next few months, we restructured everything. My penthouse was secured in an irrevocable trust. My business assets were placed in a separate LLC with independent management. The inheritance from my father, modest though it was, had been legally documented as entirely mine, with no familial claim. And the papers my mother's lawyer had drawn up? I had reviewed them secretly before ever stepping into that conference room. I knew what she was trying to do. I also knew that her documents were built on false premises, claims of shared ownership that didn't exist, verbal agreements that had never been made, and assets that were never hers to take. What I signed wasn't a transfer. It was an acknowledgement. By signing, I confirmed that the assets were held in legal structures my mother had no access to. And buried in the fine print, language her own lawyer had failed to catch, was a clause stating that by presenting these documents, the party requesting transfer acknowledged they had no prior legal claim. My mother had just signed away her leverage. I told all of this to my best friend, Naomi Trent, when she came over the next morning. Naomi had known me since college. She'd watched me build my company. She'd seen me excuse every hurtful thing my mother had ever done. "Wait," she said, setting down her coffee. "So she thinks she just took everything from you?" "Yes." "But she actually signed a document admitting she was never entitled to it?" "Yes." Naomi stared at me. "Vanessa Cole, you absolute genius." I didn't feel like a genius. I felt exhausted, relieved maybe, but not victorious. "I didn't want this," I said quietly. "I wanted her to love me without conditions. I kept hoping she'd change." Naomi reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You already knew the answer to that, didn't you? Would you accept this treatment from anyone else? Why accept it from her?" She was right. If a stranger had tried to manipulate me into signing over my home, I would have laughed them out of the room. But because it was my mother, because it was family, I had made excuse after excuse. That morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to chase her anymore. I wasn't going to explain myself, defend my success, or beg for heirlooms that should have been given freely. I drafted a letter I never sent. I wrote down every hurt, every manipulation, every time she made me feel small for daring to succeed. And then I deleted it. I didn't need her to read it. I just needed to stop carrying it. For the first time in my life, I chose myself over obedience. I blocked her number. I told my doorman she wasn't permitted in my building. I changed the emergency contact at my doctor's office from her name to Naomi's, and then I waited. The next morning, I woke up with a strange lightness in my chest. Not quite peace, but something close to it. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for her approval. I was done being her backup plan. It was time to be my own priority. 3 weeks passed. Then Gerald Finch, my mother's attorney, made a phone call that changed everything. I wasn't there for the conversation, but I heard about it later, from Marcus, of all people, who called me in a state of disbelief. "Vanessa," he said, "what did you do?" "I didn't do anything. Mom is losing her mind. Her lawyer called her this morning in a total panic. He said the papers she made you sign don't do what she thought they did. He's saying she might have actually destroyed her own case." I didn't gloat. I didn't even feel satisfied. Just tired. "She never had a case, Marcus." "What do you mean?" "I mean the penthouse was never hers. The business accounts were never hers. The trust Dad left me was never hers. She built an entire legal strategy on a fantasy." Silence. Then Marcus said something that surprised me. She told me you owed her. She said Dad promised her control of everything. Dad never said that. He left a will. She just didn't like what it said. More silence. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. Have you ever had a moment when you realize the person you've been defending your whole life might not be who you thought they were? That was the moment for Marcus. I didn't know, he said finally. I just believed her. I know. It wasn't an apology, but it was a crack. The first crack in the narrative my mother had built. Over the next few months, I focused on myself. I expanded my business. I closed on 2 new development projects in the city. I started mentoring young women entrepreneurs through a local nonprofit. I even began journaling again, something I hadn't done since my father was alive. I built a life that didn't require my mother's blessing. Naomi introduced me to her extended friend group, a circle of people who had all walked through their own versions of family chaos. We had dinners together. We celebrated each other's wins. I finally understood what chosen family meant. Meanwhile, my mother's situation began to unravel. Gerald Finch quietly withdrew as her attorney, something about a conflict of interest that everyone knew was really about embarrassment. The documents she'd tried to use against me had not only failed, they'd exposed her intentions in black and white. Word got around in her social circle. A few of her longtime friends started keeping their distance. One of them, a woman named Harriet Vaughn, who had known our family for decades, reached out to me privately. I had no idea Lorraine had been treating you like this, she said. She always made it sound like you were the difficult one. I'm sorry I believed her. I thanked her. I didn't hold it against her, but I also didn't invite her into my life. Knowing that my mother's grip was loosening, on me, on her reputation, on the control she had wielded for so long, should have felt like triumph. Instead, it felt like balance. I grieved the mother I wished I'd had. I accepted the one I actually got. And I moved forward. 2 months later, a package arrived at my building. Inside were my grandmother's sapphire ring and my father's watch, the heirlooms my mother had held hostage for 15 years. No note, no apology. Just the items, wrapped in tissue paper like she had never used them against me. I sat with them in my hands for a long time. There was no victory in that moment, only a quiet reclaiming of something that had always been mine. I wondered, was this her way of surrendering? Or just another move in a game I was no longer willing to play? 1 year later, my life looked nothing like it had before. My business was thriving. I had opened a second office across the state. I was dating someone kind, a man named Daniel who asked about my day and actually listened to the answer. My penthouse no longer felt like a place I had to defend. It just felt like home. And then my mother called. I hadn't heard her voice in over a year. I almost didn't recognize the number. She'd called from a new phone, but I answered, and before I could say anything, she was already speaking. Vanessa, I need to see you. Her voice was thinner than I remembered, less commanding. There was something underneath it I hadn't heard in years, vulnerability. Why? I asked. Because I'm your mother, because we should be family, because, she paused, because I'm not well. She told me she had been diagnosed with a heart condition. Nothing immediately fatal, but enough to slow her down. Enough to make her realize, she claimed, that life was short. I've had time to think, she said, about everything, about how I treated you. I want to make things right. I sat in silence, listening to the woman who had once tried to take everything from me now asking for my forgiveness. Old guilt rose up in my chest, the kind that tells you to smooth things over, to keep the peace, to be the bigger person no matter what it costs. But new clarity pushed back. Mom, I said, I hope you find the care you need. I really do. Then come see me. Let's start over. I can't do that, she exhaled sharply. You're really going to hold a grudge after everything I've done for you? There it was. Even now, she couldn't help herself. I'm not holding a grudge, I said. I'm holding a boundary. There's a difference. Vanessa, you still have Marcus. You have friends. You have resources. I didn't take everything from you, Mom. I just stopped letting you take everything from me." She went quiet. Then, in a voice I barely recognized, she said, "I never wanted to lose you." "I know," I said, "but you were never willing to keep me as I actually was, only as who you wanted me to be." We ended the call with no resolution. She didn't apologize. I didn't fold. And for the first time, I was okay with that. I realized something important that night. Forgiveness doesn't mean reunion. Loving someone from a distance is still love. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for them is to stay away. I don't hate my mother. I grieve her. I grieve the relationship we could have had if she had seen me clearly. I grieve the childhood I spent trying to earn what should have been given freely. But I also celebrate what I have now. A home that's truly mine. A business that reflects my values. A partner who respects my boundaries. A circle of friends who remind me that family isn't always blood. So after everything you've heard, if you were standing where I am now with a mother asking you to come back and call it healing, would you return and risk everything you've built? Or would you stay free and call it self-respect? I already know what I chose. I didn't betray my mother. I stopped letting her own me. And that is a difference she may never understand, but one I finally do. And that's where Vanessa's story ends. Not with revenge, but with freedom. Not with destroying her mother, but with refusing to be destroyed by her. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever been made to feel like your success wasn't yours, like your love came with conditions, or like setting a boundary made you the villain, just know you're not alone. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to choose yourself over someone who should have chosen you first? I read every single comment, and your stories matter just as much as the ones I share here. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. We post every week, and trust me, some of these stories will leave you speechless. Like this video if Vanessa made the right call. Share it with someone who needs to hear that boundaries aren't betrayal. And remember, you don't owe anyone access to your peace, not even family. Until next time, stay strong, stay aware, and never let anyone make you feel small for protecting what's yours. This is Untold Revenge Files. I'll see you in the next one.